Welcome to Iron Summit, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of becoming your best self, blending expert insights on strength training, smart recovery, optimal nutrition, and mindset mastery to help you elevate your game.
What's up, guys? If you're looking to level up your training, click the link in the description and check out the Iron Summit Gains Emporium. Our strength training plans are designed to help you pack on muscle, and with our software, you can track every workout right from your phone. Plus, you'll have direct access to us for any questions along the way. Don't just train, level up your training.
What's
Cool.
up?
What's up, guys?
Special episode. This is our
Always is when I'm here.
second repeat guest. That's how much we like Cooper.
Hell yeah. That is an honor.
Coop, I do have to ask, what crazy things have you done since we last talked? Because last time you camped out in an igloo, and
Yep.
I don't know if you could top that.
I did some sand dune camping.
How do you camp in a sand dune?
You lay on it.
Did you put a tent up?
And it hurts your back the whole night, and you don't sleep. The most fun part about that one was it 0 hours of sleep, 100 like sand. You're like, oh, it's nice soft sand. No, it's not. It's really
sleep
not.
hypertrophy.
Sleep hypertrophy, and yep, I don't know that it's working. I think that experiment, I can safely say I would need to do it more. I think I would need to really abuse myself every day for a month.
Could you bring a cot to put on the ground, or would it just sink?
You could.
Then you're going against the point of sleep hypertrophy, Ryan.
Yeah, I guess.
I gotta say, walking, the real fear there would be walking uphill on the dunes, with the extra weight, because I did it with about 50 pounds, and it was 1.5 miles, and I wanted to fucking kill myself. Dude, next, I'm not even kidding, next to swimming and wrestling, I don't think there was a worse cardio for someone above 200 pounds. I was dying.
Was it food and water? What was 50 pounds that you needed on your back?
That was self-inflicted. There's some plate weight in there in the mix with all the camping stuff, because I was like, let's just see what happens.
You could have replaced your plates with a comfortable sleeping situation.
If I was a coward. If I was a coward.
Why don't you get a camel and have the camel
Cooper slept on the plate?
Yeah, I should have. I genuinely should have. But yeah, that was a mistake. Like 1.5 miles. I'm not the hardest 1.5 miles of my life.
Were you solo?
This up the sand, and it's probably already hard as is without the pack. But with the pack, I was I really severely overestimated my lung capacity under 60 pounds going uphill.
Yeah,
it's really great.
About right.
Yeah,
there's a lake, I forget where it's at, but there's this huge, really steep slope, and everybody goes down it to get in the water or whatever, and it's $3,000 to get an emergency rescue because everybody can't get back up it.
Yeah,
so
I've seen that one.
I feel like you're training for that.
Pretty much, dude. I don't know how. There's a lot of people that were just I'm not going up anymore. And I was I don't blame you, dude. I'm getting there myself. I'm I don't want to do this either. And then there was a kid. There were kids though, high school kids, no sunscreen on, blood red skin from the sun, carrying up inflatable. I don't even know. It was a raft to go sleep on that at the top. And I was you know what? That's pretty ballsy, because that's awkward as fuck.
That sounds like a high school kid move.
Yeah, but you can get down really quickly. You basically surf it down.
And they did. And it was pretty cool.
Well, let's get into it today, Cooper. Let's first, just in case someone didn't hear the last time, introduce you and why you're qualified to talk about our fascinating topic today.
Sure. You want me to do that, or are you going to do that?
Yeah, you, bro.
Okay, beautiful.
Put it on you.
So I've been a strength and conditioning coach since 2017. And I got to intern at Westside Barbell. I worked at Equinox. I've worked in the tactical setting privately, and have owned my own business. So I've worked with like pro athletes. I've worked with tactical. I've worked with Gen Pop. College guys. There's been a lot over the years that I've been able to get my hands dirty with, and that's kind of the very short, abridged version of my background and such.
Cooper Napoli and why you should trust him. Also, if you're watching the podcast and you can just see Cooper's mustache and mullet combination, you would know you should trust him.
That's plus 50% at least.
Yeah, at least.
Coop, can I interest you in getting a bullet? Can you do a bowl cut mullet for me next time I see you?
100%. You
All
tell
right, cool.
me, dude. I don't let my wife pick the haircuts. I let Ryan Deacon pick the haircuts. So,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course. You're welcome.
Just Ryan.
Just Ryan. Yep.
He holds a special place in your heart.
Coop, something that I think we've kind of talked about recently is like an Operation Piss Missile, and just being functionally strong, being, going in there, slamming heavy weights in the gym, but then also like looking good and getting this blend of what I think, people are looking for. How do you think about, bodybuilding, hypertrophy, performance training? How do you think about how these are all different and how you use them in a training program with somebody that's, has different goals?
Yeah. I want to add one thing to that too. And it's how are they different? How are they the same? I think that's kind of like a good crux. And
so
one more piece of framing, Cooper, before we hop into it, because I know Cooper and we're all passionate about this one. But I think there's a common misconception that like there's quote unquote performance training, there's quote unquote bodybuilding training, there's quote unquote hypertrophy training, and they're different. And like an athlete shouldn't be doing bodybuilding training, and a bodybuilder shouldn't be doing athletic training or performance training, etc.
Yeah.
And we're here to dig into that today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so good questions. And I think it is important to like define the terms, right? And get a really strong sense of the foundation of what we're talking about there. And so when I think of performance training, right, I think that is, something where we have a very specific intention in mind. Right. And I would go as far as to say, like, whatever field sport or whatever, like if we're wrestling or doing a martial art or whatever it might be, like those are pretty obvious how you need to, you need to perform better at that thing, essentially get more wins, get those small, stats up that result in a win. Right. In that respect, and using training to see that actually convert on the field or on the mat. As it relates to bodybuilding, I would argue that is performance training, but it's performance training in the context of hypertrophy, right? And building muscle in specific spots so that you achieve a certain look. And when we have these different divisions of men's and women's bodybuilding, right, it's very specific what the differences in those are and what the judges are looking for, on the stage. I'm not like crazy well versed in that, but right, like it's pretty obvious that like the mass monsters in, I think, what is it, Max? Men's bodybuilding, right?
Men's open.
And then there's, men's open. Yeah. And then there's like, the Chris Bumsteads who have a different aesthetic, right? And, amongst the women, it's like bikini, figure, all those different ones, there's just different stuff going on. And so I view it as performance training, but I think the really important term to define is hypertrophy, because I think that that's what everyone thinks bodybuilding is. And I think that that's a certain outcome that is severely underutilized at times in performance training for field sports, right, as it relates to the diet and such. And so what I mean by that is hypertrophy is an outcome, not a style of training, and it is all framed around the I guess the presence of a certain chemical substrate, right, that being like glycogen and the proteins and the amino acids. It's the diet that results in hypertrophy. The training, right, is something that I believe is like if you told me like, hey, we're doing 3x6 back squat today, like, would that be for hypertrophy? Is that for strength? Like what is that for? And I think the answer can be tied to a diet more than it can like, hey, this is what a 3x6 is doing. So does that make sense? And do you guys have any questions on that?
In terms of framing.
What do you mean by diet?
Yeah,
like,
dive into that for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I think about strength training, right, and hypertrophy training, like I have a really hard time, like as coaches dig into what they're talking about, they're hearing like, oh, well, we don't do 4x8 because that's bodybuilding or that's hypertrophy training. And I guess I'm curious, like, as people say that, it's like, well, if bodybuilding is a specific physique outcome that requires an internal environment that's created through a diet where you're eating in a surplus to achieve hypertrophy, isn't that 4x8 just damaging the tissue super deeply? And thus, if we're just recovering to a baseline, it's just making that tissue harder to tear. Right. So I firmly believe that like there really is no difference between strength training, hypertrophy training, performance training. They're all the same, but like for you to actually grow to hit new lines of tissue, that's a diet. That is not a training style that necessarily gets you there. So I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I say diet in this context.
Yeah, I totally. So like, because this is something I grapple with as well, Cooper, because people are like, what kind of workout should I do to get more toned? Should I be doing like higher reps, so like 4x15s? I'm like, well, 4x15s in a caloric surplus, you're going to get pretty freaking jacked. You're going to add muscle tissue. 4x15s in a caloric surplus, you're going to lose fat. So like a 4x15 is thought of as a quote unquote bodybuilding scheme, set rep scheme. But really 4x15 is just 4x15. And then the kind of calories you're eating are determining whether or not that's like hypertrophy, getting toned, or if you're just kind of eating into maintenance and you're a wrestler, you can use 4x15s to just make tissue harder to tear or strengthen a certain tissue. At Iron Summit, we are about getting everything we can out of our workouts and everyday lives. If you aren't wearing a pair of barefoot or wide toe box trainers, you are leaving gains on the table. The Sashi Athletics Ronin Ichi Minimalist Trainer is a perfect barefoot shoe. Not only does it perform like other major brands on the market, it is actually good looking. Even my wife says so. Get a pair today for 10% off with the code IronSummit10. Link is in the bio. In a bit more of an endurance capacity that's specific to wrestling.
Yeah. I got two things with that. Like one, I think it makes a lot of sense, except like if you're super under eating and you're doing high rep stuff, like you're also adding an injury risk in there as well. And then two, like what are your thoughts on, I think maybe this is a big generalization, but most people do maybe not lighter, but like lower reps on compound movements. And then they're hitting, sets of 15 on an accessory movement. So how do you think about that in the context of, are you doing hypertrophy? Like it doesn't matter. We're talking just what kind of food and what your goal is, and how you're eating in surplus versus non-surplus.
Yeah. I definitely think that does matter, but I think the context of what tissue really matters, right? And I go from like red to white. If we're talking tendon and ligament, which is going to be for sports, right? Like a lot more important than on a bodybuilding stage, then we're probably going to leverage things up to the 5 rep range because there's a ton of evidence that that's the stuff that builds the tendons and ligaments better than anything.
White tissue.
And going hard and at a high intensity and doing that in lengthened, mid, and shortened positions. Of a given, I guess, movement on a given strength curve. With that, now in the context of bodybuilding, though, it's all red. Right? It's all muscle tissue that we're going after. So that doesn't matter as much, right? But we can still gain a lot, from kind of learning from what affects those structures the most, because there's huge hormonal components to this that allow you to get more out of both sides of that coin as we go. And so I like the muscle fibers that can sort of go the slow twitch direction or the fast twitch direction, right? I think as you train, right, depending on what speeds you're moving at, and depending how heavy you go, like there's really not a scenario in which you can't build kind of, I guess, the unique muscle fiber type for your body for your goal that you need. Does that feel like that answers that question?
Yeah, I guess I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you have, you know, a bodybuilder, you're still going to train your white tissue through, strength training, right? You're not directly training it the way you would want to with a sport, right? But there's still like this side effect that's coming through this training modality. But how do you think about like structure? Give me an example of like how you would structure, I don't know, 3 exercises together for an athlete versus a bodybuilder in order to chase hypertrophy if your goal is to put on muscle, but one's for sport, one's for, looking good on a bodybuilding stage.
Well, I have some thoughts on this too.
Got it. Yeah. So I would argue that let's just use a very simple triset of a mobility exercise. And let's use the shoulder, right? And we'll do like shoulder cars, which is like a functional range conditioning movement.
Yeah.
We'll use bench, right, as kind of the main lift there, and then we'll use an accessory of let's say like a pec fly, right, where we're a cable one where we're really squeezing in the short end there, right? So if I'm thinking about that in the context of a baseball player, right, and I'm doing the shoulder cars movement to like get that joint capsule nice and open, nice and free. Maybe I do some isometric stuff, some pails, rails to kind of give some more internal and external rotation to that shoulder. That's going to give the joint capsule, which is where all the motor neurons that go out into the muscles, they all pass through that joint capsule. And so if we open that up and build a really fluid movement through those zones of rotation, right? When I get that athlete under the bench press, I can now move violently with speed, right? If I'm going to do something more dynamic effort, and they're not going to run into those sticky zones. They're going to get the maximal contraction of the tissue at the speed we need it to move it. Right. When I then go put them on the cable fly, right, to really get that squeeze, if you can see here, right, as I come down in the bench, that's going to work more mid to lengthen position. But if I'm using the cable, that's going to work more, mid to shorten position typically for most body types. And so that's just getting the humerus, right, to go from abduction to adduction with speed, which is a massive component of pitching a baseball. Right. But if I'm going to talk about like bodybuilding, I'm still going to do that shoulder mobility stuff, still going to work on the athlete's internal and external rotation so that when we put a heavy bench in their hands and we move it slow now, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way down, that all that, I guess the neural map, right? The neurology, the neurons that are going through the muscle fibers, that those are experiencing as much damage and signaling that should move fluidly and kind of safely for the athlete. And then when we go to the cable pec fly, right, that's where we're really getting that squeeze instead of working in that lengthened position. And at that point, in the context of both athletes, you're working the joint through its full range of motion. So these are the things that are the same, right? It's just the speed at which we're doing that changes from goal to goal. And maybe some of the considerations of like what specific lines of tissue come into play. And I think a weak point for an athlete is extremely different than a weak point for a bodybuilder, but probably not quite as different as you think when you're just looking at the eyeball test of those two things. It's like, if that's small as shit relatively on an athlete, it's probably weak.
Yeah.
Same thing with a bodybuilder. It's just like, hey, this division of your tricep looks like shit and we need to build it up.
Yeah. And to add even to blur the lines even more, I want to see what you guys think. But like, let's say we have a baseball pitcher and he's got nasty breaking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But and baseball pitchers may be the wrong example, but we're gonna run with it.
Yeah.
And we want to improve the speed of his fastball. We can continue to do all the dynamic effort stuff, move that bench press as fast as possible. But maybe the reality is this pitcher, he's 6'5", 165 pounds, and he just needs to be a little thicker. You're going to do training blocks where you move that bench press slowly to add muscle tissue that then you can go train in a dynamic fashion, that newly added muscle tissue, to make that then explosive and basically changes fastball from 90 to 95. So during that block where we're not doing dynamic effort bench, we're now doing slower eccentric bench to really target muscle tissue growth. And like we talked about earlier, he's got to be in a surplus and, you know, really be in that context of hypertrophy. But now bodybuilding training is performance training.
Yep.
One and the same. You're just, and that's where, like, I think it's really hard to draw these lines. There's like no such thing as bodybuilding training or performance training. It's all just training and what outcome do you want to get from the stimulus. And sometimes they can be the same. Sometimes it's different.
But I think something important you're saying there, Max, is like bodybuilding training is really good at what it's good at, and that's putting on muscle. But if you're an athlete, your step one's the same as a bodybuilder, right? Put on muscle. Your step two is train that muscle to be functional to what you're trying to do with that muscle.
Yep, exactly. And then I'll add another piece of context here is if you're an athlete, you're going to be performing your sport on a regular basis.
Right.
Like, you're a college wrestler. So it's really hard to like add new muscle tissue that isn't functional. And this is, I think, a huge misconception is like adding tissue is going to make you slow and unathletic. And it's actually pretty much the opposite. Is the more muscle tissue you have up to a certain point, and we'll get to that in a second, but adding more muscle tissue just makes you more athletic or gives you more athletic potential, because as long as you have, like Cooper, to your point, the white tissue to match the load, and a good program will take that into account. And look, I mean, we had John Quint on here. You can get really, really specific in training the white tissue and then crush the muscle tissue as well. But the more muscle tissue you have, the more athletic you can be. And if you're consistently performing your sport while you're doing that training, it's going to be really hard to have that muscle tissue be not functional. You'd have to like take months off your sport, train just like a bodybuilder for that balance to get out of whack. Last piece of context I'll say here, and then want to hear your guys' response, is when we're talking about athlete, we're mostly talking about non-enhanced individuals.
Right.
It's so hard to get above the point of athletic, not enhanced. Like, it's almost not worth worrying about. Like, we can dive into that science, and there's a lot of studies on this, but like achieving a fat-free mass index where you're going to really be prohibiting your mobility or functional athletic abilities naturally is almost a non-concern.
Yeah. Coop, I
Unless
want
you're in like a weight class sport, Ryan, where you got to fit into a certain,
right.
Like, we're talking about like a football safety. That dude should have as much muscle mass as he possibly can for what he can do.
Right. Yes, but 100%. I mean, you look at a sprinter, right? They're jacked because they got to be that fast twitch, like explosive muscle. So something that I want to get you guys to take on too is like, I think something that we don't talk about enough that's kind of a really big deal for athletics is like your unique blend of like slow twitch versus fast twitch muscle fibers. And it's hard to like, it's cards you're dealt, but I think it makes you a good or bad, performer in your sport. And if you have like, you see it, I'm going to talk about wrestling because I know wrestling, but like in wrestling, there's people that are super explosive. They get tired really quickly. Like and they have to learn to wrestle a style where they're not blowing their gas tank super early. And then the other thing that I used to have coaches say that I want to hear what you guys think about this too. But I think it's more the fast twitch, slow twitch is be like, oh, they got a lot of muscle mass. They get tired quickly. All those muscles need that oxygen. Keep pushing the pace, stuff like that. And although like, I think there's some truth to that, I think it's more like slow twitch versus fast twitch than it is like if you have a lot of muscle mass, you're going to get more tired because your muscles need oxygen. And how efficient you are at moving within your sport.
Yeah. Cooper, I feel like you're itching to say something.
No. I mean, keep going if you guys have stuff.
Well, yeah, I was going to I'll use myself as an example. I was like, from a muscular standpoint, a pretty big heavyweight, but I was also like the guy that pushed the pace in matches. Like, I never felt that muscle mass was a hindrance from an endurance perspective. I just had to match the endurance training or the wrestling specific training to the like muscle I had, but it was able to condition the whole way up. Maybe it was a little more work like along the way, but it's absolutely possible. It's just, how are you training that muscle, that newly added muscle tissue? That's what's going to change it. And yeah, maybe I have more like of the slow twitch muscle fiber, or I know this, I don't have them memorized. It's like the type 2B muscle fiber that kind of lends itself well to being able to be conditioned. But if you're training the correct, like back to our set rep structures, if you're doing higher rep, quote unquote, bodybuilding style sets, you're actually building excellent muscle endurance that's going to carry over well into a sport like wrestling. It's like, if you got really big doing only sets of 3, like you just power lifted your way to being a heavyweight physique in wrestling, yeah, maybe you're going to run out of juice because you're just never training that muscle for any kind of endurance. Cooper?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, right? It is truly like, if this will probably be a very long answer here, but if we look at entropy, right? And that's just your body's, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So like you brought up the pitcher example, right? Like, if I don't get my shoulder to externally rotate to almost 180 degrees on a regular basis,
you're going to lose it.
When the fuck else would I need that? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and when the fuck else am I going to be there? Like, ever. Right? So you got to like train that shit all the time just to like at least maintain it, right?
Yeah.
For really elite level pitchers. And, at a certain point, yeah, how you do that is pitching, but you got to start loading shit at a certain point and getting it stronger and getting the tissue there. And I would argue that, like, going back to the context of like hypertrophy and all this, is like, I've come to believe that actually every sport is a weight class sport.
Yeah.
To an extent. And if you look at the linemen, right, there ain't no fucking 5'10", 200 pounders.
Yeah.
Right? That shit like ends at like high school, like JV, right? I'm not doing that, right? I could go play on a JV high school left tackle and that'd be about it. Right? Like that's and as you continue to go up a level, that's why it's like, I think it's so crazy watching like college and NFL football, right? Because you see like, okay, the average lineman in college, yeah, sure, you've got your SEC guys that are just a prototypical pro team, but you've got these interesting chess matches between lighter, faster linemen and heavier, I guess less fast guys, and then you just get to the SEC and they've got fucking both. Right? And when you get to the NFL, it's like, hey, everyone can kind of do this stuff now. Right? But there's a minimum weight in the NFL, and the vast majority of guys are like 275 plus on the O-line. Most of them are 300 pounders.
At least, yeah.
At least, like, at least. And so I think, to go back to the point, Max, of like, getting that like cardio, it's like, to have a great cardio base and be able to move a 300 pound self really well, you better be able to squat like twice your body weight still.
Yeah.
Like, as
absolutely.
shitty as that is, and that's really hard to do, to squat 600 pounds, just period, right? Not even in the context of powerlifting, in your life, that's really hard to do. Right? So there's these feats of strength that just get harder and harder and harder to obtain the higher a level that you go. But the underlying principle here is that for your position, for what you're trying to do, there's a minimum weight and there's a maximum weight. That just, like, by nature of how the training is and what the average person is kind of fixed to a certain right? And if we go to baseball, right, there's pitchers that throw 90, 100 mile per hour fastballs, like, 20 fucking pitches in a row if they wanted. And they're just 6'8" and like 190, but they've got that long lever on them that lets them produce that power. Versus like if I wanted to throw a 90 to 100 mile per hour fastball, one, I've got a lot of work to do mobility wise because I've never done that a day in my life, never played baseball. But I also like, I don't have any of that coordination. I don't have like any of that stuff. So it like the size thing, like I feel like I have all the prerequisites to do that. Because if and here's a good example right here, right? If we all do this test, put your hand on your chest and tap your chest as hard as you can with your middle finger, right? Not very tough. But if you put your thumb under it and you slam that down, right? You hear the force, you feel the force.
Yeah.
When you put on body weight, that is you interacting with the ground, right? Which is where you're usually producing all your power from. So the more weight you add into a system, the more potential it has to, I guess, meet the demand you're asking of it. And I think a lot of athletes they don't spend time putting lines of tissue down where they probably need to, in order to start to express those elite levels of, performance.
Power and performance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think one extra piece of context we should add here, which it's probably a little obvious, but I'll say it just so someone's not like, well, what about endurance athletes? I think we're talking in the context of athletes where strength training is very necessary. If you're a marathon runner, you're not lifting much weights because by the inherent nature of running marathons, you want to be as light as possible. And lifting weights is going to add a lot. You should lift weights. And Cooper, I know you've trained some endurance athletes, and maybe you can touch on that for a second. But like that's a specific example where like bodybuilding style training is probably going against what you're trying to do there because you're just going to add weight that you then have to carry for 26 miles. Like that pretty, but like in the context of any sport where power is performance, I think everything we've talked about is very relevant.
Yeah. What about, I guess, Cooper and then Max? I'd love to hear your take on this too. But like, what about context of, I mean, I think there's general principles and most people aren't to the point where you're like getting super specific, like a, 300-pound bodybuilder where you're trying to add a little bit of mass to your rear delt and getting that specific. But like, I do think there's certain principles that work better for certain sports. And I think about like wrestling, like you want strong legs, you want strong shoulders, you want a strong back, right? And then your neck's important and you got to kind of use everything, but there's a certain context with that. If you're going to be a power lifter, like you got to have a really strong trunk. If you're going to squat 600 pounds, if you have a skinny trunk, it's not going to work well. Like you got to have a thick midsection that can like brace your spine and make sure that you don't, blow up under a bar. So how did you think about that with training athletes, or are most athletes at the point where you're like, hey, we're just trying to pack on muscle generally, and they're not to the level of, a pro football player where you're, maybe getting more specific with those types of training modalities?
So that's a really good question because I think like where you choose to add tissue is really important, right? And where you spend a lot of time. And so there's a guy, Hunter Schur, he was on a show I do called Unracked, and his whole take on training special operations guys was that, let's assess all these different capacities, right? Let's assess power. Let's assess, aerobic capacity. Let's put them under a ruck, right? And, make them go to like, if this is the standard, let's make them go shoot for that. And then let's get some really subjective feedback because that guy feels everything in his low back. That guy feels everything in his calves. And that guy's quads are burned out by like the top of the first hill. Right. And they're just trash the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So body dependent. Right. And this is like, limb lengths and all those things. Like there's just going to be a reality that like, hey, a weak or maybe even entirely missing link in the chain And it's usually the athletes, a good athlete is going to be able to give you subjective feedback on where that is, and what they feel in their motion. Once you kind of identify that, that's probably where you need to spend time. Right. And the amount of time you choose to spend, right. If I have football players and all I did was work pecs because pecs equals pressing, right? Well, then I'm neglecting, like, for a defensive lineman, offensive lineman, like 70 to 80% of the things that they can then go do with their lats to, they're not just running through guys. Sometimes they're pulling them down. You guys know with wrestling and all the hand fighting, like there's a lot of pushing, there's a lot of pulling, and the way that you kind of build 360 degrees of strength in an athlete is largely determined by what they actually feel as they're kind of going through the thing they need to do. And it is going to be different for everyone. So to answer the question, like there's also all these other capacities we have to think about, right? You brought up neck, right? In the context of powerlifting, I would argue that like ability to withstand like cervical pressure when you have a bar on your back, right? That's something very unique to the sport, that like, yeah, you kind of just build it as you put the bar on your back. But when you're starting to train for 1,000-pound squats, that's a different story. You might need to go like, do some yoke picks, right? At like 1,100, 1,200 and just feel that pressure so that 1,000 starts to feel light. Right. And there's all these considerations, like in wrestling, you have, if you're going to go do a double leg and you're going to put your head through a motherfucker's chest, right, and like take them to the ground. I don't know if that's right or not. That's how I.
That's good. That was good.
Oh, yeah.
That's you need to be able to brace that thing, but you also need to be able to go from a quick brace to whipping your head around to get in a new position, right, and kind of dump them off. So there's a fluidity and a mobility to that kind of movement, right, that's unique to sport, where if we brace all the time, we're going to get good at bracing and not necessarily get good at the thing that's supposed to come after the brace. Right. Versus like if we're only working whip, mobility, quick, fast movement, we're not getting good at the brace. And it's going to be really hard for us to put power out. Right. In that context. And, for bodybuilding, it's like, just get it as big as you fucking humanly can and make it look proportional.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. That's why I like bodybuilding.
That's what's cool about it. Well, I think this is one Cooper and I were talking about, like a couple practical examples, Ryan, to your point, where you can use like really body, quote unquote, because I don't like this clearly, but quote unquote bodybuilding specific exercises, set rep schemes that are actually really functional, or quote performance. Like, for example, the iliac lat, which is a very most bottom division of your lat, super important in wrestling. It's like when you're in a real, like if you're in on a single leg and someone's sprawled and you got to pull that in from that position, like you're going to use a ton of iliac lat. And iliac lat is really hard to train in the gym. You got to get like super bodybuildery, like get in the stretch position, do cable pulls from like way over your head, at a position you'd be in a wrestling match. But like, unless you're in a gym and you're like intentionally training that muscle, you're probably not going to get it. Like most college strength and conditioning programs are probably doing a pretty bad job at training the iliac lat. And that's where I think something like a bodybuilding is actually performance. Like if you can target the iliac lat, one, just teach athletes how to use it. Like so many athletes don't even understand how to pull with their iliac lat, but teach them how to use it in the context of a weight room, add muscle tissue there. You're going to become much more functional on a wrestling mat. And the next time you're in on a single leg, you're going to be like, wow, I feel a lot stronger pulling from this position. So that's like a really good example. Or I know Cooper that used the iliac lat again. Like you feel like it really helps power lifters learn how to stabilize their core. So
yeah, 100%. It connects, if it connects to the pelvis, right? So you have to, like, that iliac crest, that's why it's called the iliac lat. So like, yeah, if that's weak, that's a power leakage. And I think that's where, like, no one knows how to target a specific line of tissue better than a bodybuilder. So as we go into like exercise selection on stuff, right, Max, like which is what you're talking about with that, like if we know that an athlete is going to experience a ton of force in this line of tissue and that's kind of unique to their sport, like I would argue that tennis is one of the few sports where you have to like really overextend until you lengthen those obliques all the way on one side, and you can go back and forth with that. Like there's only like 5 things that are going to actually train that, like there's a few cable setups that are going to do that particularly well, and then like nothing else is fucking hitting that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to be like, I would argue that like every coach should engage in bodybuilding training to a certain extent, if anything, just to learn the variations.
So to play devil's advocate there, let's say you're a tennis player, you're training your obliques a lot because everything you're doing, you're over rotating. You're getting hypertrophy from, I know, okay, hopefully you're eating, right? Like we just defined that as more of an eating term, but like you're getting a lot of stimulus from your playing. It probably makes sense to do some, functional cables or band stuff as well. But isn't there an argument that like you're getting so much that with your sport, in order to like avoid injury risk, you should be training everything outside of that more so that you're not getting all these muscle imbalances? Because I think something that happens a lot, you see it with a sprinter all the time. They are so quad dominant, they start pulling their hamstrings. And so it's like they're so strong because of the thing that they're doing with their sport. They actually need to train the functional thing for their sport so that they're preventing injuries, because your body's staying symmetrical or as symmetrical as possible. And you're not putting an unnecessary amount of like pressure on your white tissues.
Yeah, no, I mean you're totally right. Like I would not have the athlete go do the exact kind of rotation that they're doing in their sport, because they're already getting that through practice and games and everything. And then, but let's keep on the tennis example, because I think that's an important one, and we'll use is this concept in strength and conditioning called dynamic correspondence, right? There's 5 pillars of it: rate of force development, dynamics of the effort, regime of muscle work. I always forget 1 or 2 of them. Accentuated region of force production, and amplitude and direction of movement. Okay,
that's good.
So those are the 5. Thank you. It's been a long time since I've talked about that one live. So, let's start with rate of force development. Right, in tennis, and let's use wrestling, tennis, and football. Right, exploding off the line from a dead stop, you need to get to like as much force as you can as quickly as possible. I'm talking offensive and defensive linemen there.
Yeah.
In wrestling, right, the second that match goes, you're moving, and you don't really stop moving. You might throw a hezi on someone, but like you are
hold on. From now on, whenever I show a fake, I'm calling it a hezi, and I love that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So you're throwing a hezi on a motherfucker, right? And but that comes from a different rhythm, different timing, and then you go. Right. So it's not from dead stop like a football lineman is. And then in tennis, right, you are like sprinting over to the other side of the court, coiling and fucking ripping. Right. So like everything's like can be relatively fast in that like extreme scenario there. So that's different rate of force development. Now for the dynamics of the effort, that's the actual like top speed you're going to get up to. Right. And so I'll change from linemen to receivers there, because now we're actually talking about like, and maybe lineman and receiver is a better way to think about it. But like lineman, you are like basically so many yards. Like how many yards are you going to run in a play? Like maybe 2, like most of the time on the line, that's just gridlock. Right. And so there's not a lot of like getting up to max speed, but a receiver is going to get up to probably 60 to 80% of their speed for 5+ yards on most plays. Right. And like has to like be able to repetitively get to that speed strength versus strength speed, right? And working at those different parts of the force velocity curve there. A tennis player, right, like probably never going to reach top speed, but laterally they are having to like explode in these different directions and transverse, versus like a wrestler, like, you know, I don't even think there's any degree of top speed. It doesn't exist. There's no running, right? But it's how it's like I think of it more plyometrically, or like in the context of a box jump. Like, can you get in and out of these positions really quickly, right? Because if I'm slow as shit to transition to get on someone's back, like, you know, you're just like, you could do all the double legs you want. If you're just too slow to get there, it doesn't matter. And that's a largely like gymnastics almost thing.
Yeah.
Right. Then we've got regime of muscle work. And I promise I'll speed up these examples here. But with regime of muscle work, it's super easy to think about, like, is it predominantly eccentric? Is it isometric? Concentric? And you can get really specific with the contraction, right? Is it isotonic? Is it quasi-isometric, right? Like, how do we work with that? Like, I think wrestling is a quasi-isometric sport. I think training the linemen is a very, like, you know, quasi-isometric a lot of times. Receiver, that shit's concentric. And eccentric, you know, force production, essentially. Like, how much can you tolerate doing that? Tennis, because you're not really like, you know, I think it's that, but in a different plane, which leads me to amplitude and direction of movement, right? Like, what planes of motion now is all that occurring in, right? And that one's like relatively explanatory: frontal, transverse, sagittal. Like, where do you spend most of the time in your sport?
Yeah.
And what? I'm forgetting one.
The number 5.
The number 5, yes.
That's hard to come back to.
Regime of muscle work, rate of force development, dynamics of the effort, amplitude and direction.
Gotta rewind.
I know. Hold on.
Dude,
let me
we got the internet.
Google.
Just Google it. Yeah.
I'm gonna Google it. Bear with me, people.
That's
we
a
can
chat
edit this
GPT if
out
I
in
ever heard one.
post. Yeah, right.
We're not editing it out.
Dynamic correspondence.
We're gonna stare at Cooper.
You cannot add awkward me.
I don't doubt that. Right. I'm not trying.
There's like a very specific link that has it laid out exactly how I interact with it. Oh, they might have deleted it, those cocksuckers.
You gotta train a large language model.
I do. I really do. Oh, here we go. Amplitude and direction, accentuated region, dynamics of the effort, rate and time, regime of muscle work. Did I forget one? Maybe I said all 5 already.
No,
so you can't count. 4. It's not that you can't remember. You can't count.
It's that I can't count. Okay, let me do this one more time before we move on here. Regime of muscle work. We went over that. Rate of force production.
Went over it.
Dynamics of effort. Went over it. Accentuated region of force production. No, I think that's the one we didn't do. We did amplitude and direction. Okay, so accentuated region. That's right. So this is the specific line of tissue that we're talking about, right? So when we go into like lats, that's not a good enough answer. Iliac lat, right? It's like glutes. No, it's glute med, right? Like it's getting really specific on like, no, it's this. Oh, and by the way, that muscle is responsible for this joint function. Right. And so it needs to be able to do that. And you know, it's why there's an argument for like every sport requires mobility. It's just like, what mobility does it require? Right. And what do we need to spend more time doing? So to go all the way back to that, right? Like, can a tennis player rotate too much? For sure. But if we just get them to hold isometrically, which they do not do any of in their sport, it's all fast whip like movements, we can train it, but not necessarily overwhelm it. Right. And get it to signal some different things, right? Like some collagen production with those isometrics can go a really long way for an athlete. Especially if we get them into that length and most like position and make them hold there, right? Where they spend maybe a microsecond, but it builds movement literacy at that point.
I think it's such a good point.
And so there's a lot of ways to do it, but the way I view GPP, DPP, and SPP, right, which is general physical preparation, directed physical preparation, and specific physical preparation, like general is going to hit 1 to 2 of those dynamic correspondence things at the same time. Directed is going to be 3 to 4, and guess what you have to do to hit all 5? You got to go play the fucking sport.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I like kiss it goodbye. Like, when it goes beyond, usually for me, like 3. Cause I might be cueing them to do the wrong thing. If I go to 4 and 5, that's for a sport coach. That's for sport drills.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not that. I am the 1 to 3 and building a very specific component of that.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. So to use the tennis example, or like a sprinter example, like it would be a terrible idea for the strength coach to have the sprinters do a bunch of sprinting.
Yeah, usually.
Like that's going to lead to overtraining. You're not going to be able to recover from that before the next time you have to go do it. But for a sprinter to do some isometric holds on a leg extension, they're going to probably be able, one, that's not a high recovery demand, and 2, you're going to be like, you're going to train soft tissue, white tissue. That's important for the act of sprinting and will reduce injury. And I think that's kind of leads to another point I would layer on top of all this, Ryan, and to like back to your original question on like, how are you not going to overtrain? There does need to be some coordination between the strength and conditioning coach and the sports coach on like overall training load. And like in the off season, that's when a tennis player can work on their obliques to then turn around, and when it's tennis season or time for a grand slam or whatever it is, have more force production in their swing. It's not like you shouldn't be targeting the obliques in that line of tissue to like in the week leading up to a major tennis tournament. Yeah. Right. So you got to like balance, like as all of us know, training is only as good as the training you can recover from.
Yeah.
And so that's all got to layer into it. And I think also to your point, where like you got to train the opposite as well. Like that's part of a good program. And to Cooper's point, like with a lineman, you got to have obviously a lot of explosive pressing power, but you got to have pulling power too. If nothing else, just to keep the joint that's responsible for pressing and pulling healthy. Iron Summit is brought to you by Bridge Athletic. Looking for a way to streamline your training programs and deliver exceptional results? Check out our friends at Bridge Athletic. Their platform is packed with over 300 templates and 1,500 instructional videos, courtesy of subject matter experts like Exos, FMS, and Hyperice, making program design both efficient and impactful. Our listeners can take advantage of an exclusive offer. For a limited time, get your first 30 days free and your next month at 50% off when you use code IRONSUMMIT, all caps. That's code IRONSUMMIT, no spaces, all caps, for 30 days free plus 50% off your second month at bridgeathletic.com. Check it out and start assigning custom programs directly to your athlete's mobile device.
Yeah. Well, and if I take this to like an extreme, right? And you think about like what would make the most sense? Like, let's say you're a rock climber. You want really big, like forearms, shoulders, lats, right? And theoretically, you should get your legs as small as possible so that you have less weight and you're going forward. But I also think there's some kind of argument of, yeah, different sports have different like muscle demands that are more dominant. But I think just in general, you're more athletic as a person when you're somewhat well-rounded, where your body is working as a system. Like, I don't think it ever makes sense to not train something. But something that I don't feel like is talked about a lot is like, what degree would you train? Let's say you're trying to build your quads. You're hamstring dominant, glute dominant. You're trying to build your quads. Most people add an extra set or two, or maybe they'll hit legs more. But like, how would you think about a ratio of training when you're trying to build up a lagging body part? And I think this is something that bodybuilding does really well, where sports development, I've never had a coach that they're like, this is the even amount of work. And to be fair, they got probably 3 hours a week with you and your main sport is your sport. But like, they have never made an individualized plan where they're like, hey, I want you to develop your shoulders more. So we're going to hit more, overhead press stuff this week instead of, more flat press stuff. So how would you think about a ratio of training something where you're still training your full body, but you're adding that extra movement for that body part you're trying to bring up?
I'm gonna say that with most athletes, right? And I like the rock climbing example because it's kind of the same for a marathon runner or ultra, right? Where it's like you want your legs to probably be that big canvas you can go play with, but your your upper body, it's like what do we need to do here?
Yeah.
And I think that because at a certain point things get too complex for an athlete to really wrap their mind around. Like if I was going to have an athlete like wave carbs, like around upper body versus lower body days, or like do some of that to like not try and trigger it as much. I just think we're running into too much.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not real. Like, that they're going to do that. Really. Yeah. Great if they're a robot, but, like there's just 90% of athletes aren't going to do that. So the way that I'd think about it is like, it's a ratio of mobility versus power versus endurance and versus like all the things that can exist like in between the scale. If we take like I love N1's scale on Max's hat there, the neurological to like metabolic, and like there's this area in between that they call hypertrophy because they're a bodybuilding company, but like I don't necessarily view it like that. It's just where you're producing a lot of tension in the muscle and like, and kind of finding a middle ground between those two things. And so I'm probably going to have, and it's maybe counterintuitive, I'm going to lift those guys heavy as fuck on their upper body if they're a marathon runner, and on their lower body if they're a rock climber, and do a shit ton of mobility. And we're just going to go heavy. We don't even need a PR all the time, but we need to go really heavy because it's going to help us get the white tissue and maybe get some of that explosive capacity that's good to have. And then the mobility is just going to relieve neurological tension throughout the entire body, in my opinion. That should be like a big goal of it, is to reduce neurological tension elsewhere. So like if your shoulder's cranked really tight, that oblique slings probably means that hip's doing something funky too. Right. And so, yeah, that's my thought on it, is like, when you have those extreme cases, like you need to do extreme training. Right. And it needs to probably look like very similar to like a West Side barbell, like max effort. You know what I mean? And like, that's the stimulus they get. It's not going to build any muscle really. But it's going to work on horsepower, and we're going to work on a lot of that stuff. And we're just going to get the joint nice and open. And by doing that at a bunch of different angles, right? So to get into like regime of muscle work and accentuated region of force production, doing that with different contraction types and all those things, it's going to build a more literate system, but it's not necessarily going to add that mass where we don't want it, and where it's actually inhibitive and negative to add it.
Yeah. I like that answer a lot. And I think that's super counterintuitive to what most people would do. And also like you tell somebody, hey, like they're like, hey, I don't want my legs to get really big. I run a lot. Or upper body gets big. I run a lot.
Go squat a single.
Fucking max.
Yeah. Right. They're like, I'm not doing heavy weight. They're actually probably going to do what's going to put on muscle tissue and go do, sets of 15.
Yep. Exactly. And that's where I think that's a good way to kind of bring it back to the original point, is I don't know if there's no such thing as quote unquote bodybuilding training or performance training or power training. There's just a desired outcome and a whole bunch of tools to get there. And they're all in the same system, and that system is just training. And it's up to a really good coach like Cooper to employ those tools to help you get your desired outcome. And I guess like what frustrates me is when we try to like silo these things in styles of training rather than looking at an outcome and just using all the tools at our disposal, because you'll get a performance coach at a Division I university who's refuses to use any bodybuilding techniques because it's quote unquote bodybuilding, when it actually could help drive the outcomes that the Division I athletes are looking for. Or vice versa, you get a bodybuilder who refuses to do anything that's performance, when those training modalities are just training modalities and could really help you develop your physique. So that's what, like, kind of the point I wanted to wrap up on is it's all just training. What is your desired outcome? Go use the tools at your disposal and try and be really well versed on what the training stimulus and adaptation from that training stimulus is, and that the different adaptations can all be beneficial for all kinds of sports, whether it's physique sports, performance sports, endurance sports. It's all just training.
I agree. When I look at like coaches' programs and they're like, well, I don't want to do any bodybuilding, and then I see like 3-4 sets of 6 to 12 reps, it's like, well, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Like what? Like
Clip
tell
it.
me what that is. Well, I'm like, yeah. Well, you don't have an answer for that. That like is gonna like get past any degree of scrutiny I'm about to throw on it, right? Because a lot of times, like coaches, it's like you're not even taking into context. Like if we do that on a leg extension versus a Bulgarian split squat, and let me tell you, I see a lot of fucking collegiate programs with 4x6 to 12 Bulgarian split squat.
Yeah, but
and it's
no
like,
way
do
they
you
would touch a leg
understand?
extension, right? Like,
yeah, but then they won't touch a leg extension, and I'm like, that is like the same muscle as it relates to the quad with like 1/1000th of the damage that you're putting into the system and the joint.
Yeah, like a Bulgarian, you're loading the length and you're doing more bodybuilding there than on a leg extension.
Exactly.
Just because it's a machine, it's the way it's perceived. Yeah, it's a great example. I think a huge shout out, if anyone's looking on a resource, who I think was kind of in my opinion, one of the masters of understanding this blend, is Charles Poliquin, rest in peace. Considered one of the greatest performance coaches of all time. I don't even know how many Olympic gold medals he coached, but I know it was like well north of 15. I think out of any strength and conditioning coach he's coached, as he's up there in terms of Olympic gold medals.
Yeah,
this dude has. And he was able to look at training as just training, and he coached also like Olympia level bodybuilders, and just understood that a stimulus is a stimulus and adaptation is an adaptation. And I think the whole world of lifting in general, I don't know what you want to call it, because it's across performance, bodybuilding, endurance, all of it would do really well to understand that, hey, let's like drop the egos about our style of training and understand that stimulus is stimulus, adaptation is adaptation, doesn't matter how you get there.
Yep. Yeah, your body doesn't know if you're lifting rocks versus dumbbells versus
doesn't know you're doing a Bulgarian split squat versus a leg extension.
But it does know if you're sleeping on sand.
It sure does, and it tells you to fuck off. Yep, it
Great
says it to you.
Well, I think this was really good, Coop, and I think it's a super interesting topic. We could talk for days about this, but I do think it's a good way to frame, like, it's so funny how complicated it is and how many different like things people pull off of training, where it's like there's a lot of tools to get to the same place you're trying to get to. It's just how you want to go about that and what you're trying to actually do. And I do think it would help people to actually look at all the tools instead of, cherry pick. Let me just keep my screwdriver and hammer.
What's in my theoretical silo.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the traditional education route sees coaches get their kinesiology degree, get their CSCS, maybe go to grad school before they start working with teams, and then they're just thrown into the fire. And like you get so busy as a strength coach in those settings that like you don't necessarily have a ton of time for continuing education unless your department decides to bring the continuing education to you. Right? Like otherwise most of that free time you have is probably going towards your family, just how brutal the schedules are. So like, I think there's a lot of argument to be made for like visiting, like Max, you're talking about the resources, like where I think one of the best signs of a truly high quality coach is have they had success in multiple different arenas? Because that tells me that that's someone that knows like the different tools to apply and when to apply them and how to work through some different like problem solving structures, 100%. I guess, and heuristics in strength and conditioning. And yeah, I think a lot of the folks that have like solely focused in on one thing and doing things one way, it's like you've lost like so much capacity, you know, to, I don't know, just learn about how dynamic the body really can be in that respect. Not always, but you know, on the whole.
Yeah.
Super well said.
Cool.
Awesome.
Excellent, fellas. Well, thanks for having me on.
It's a great
always appreciate it. Always a blast.
Where people can find you, where can people find you? I don't know why that was hard for me to say.
It's all good. I know it's hard for you. You know, at Delta 5 Performance on Instagram is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. And then come check us out on Unracked. It's on Bridge Athletics YouTube page. You can just look that up. There's like a lot of cool educational resources coming out with that. And that's a good place to, you know, spend an hour learning from another coach doing something really cool in a different area and add more tools to your toolbox. So
you're the man. Thank you, Cooper.
Cool. You got it, fellas. Later.